So, freedom and trust. If we look back through history, we can see that most significant advances in commerce have resulted in significant changes in the structure of how humans trust. Yes, significant changes in commerce and changes in human trust tend to go hand in hand. For example, in ancient times, the change in the structure of commerce from us being members of an artisan tribe to us becoming servants in a kingdom empowering royalty changed what trust meant between one human and another. Here we see a change in commerce changing how we trust. In the Middle Ages, the change in the structure of commerce from us being servants in a kingdom to becoming soldiers fighting to empower sovereignties again changed what trust meant for the human species. Again, we see a change in commerce can change how we trust. And most recently, on December 31st, in the year 1600, with the invention of the limited liability corporation, we began to see a change in the structure of commerce from armies of soldiers protecting the wealth of sovereignties to a state of commerce where workers became indentured servants paid to accumulate wealth on behalf of equity owners who, regardless of their actions, are protected behind a veil of limited liability. Again, a change in commerce, changing how we trust. The problem is, since December 31st, 1600, which is over 400 years ago, if I'm doing my math right, there has not been a significant macroeconomic change in the structure of commerce that has significantly impacted how we trust between each other. It's true that between that time and now, we have seen notable adjustments in commerce, things such as the abolishment of slavery, the rights of women to vote and own property, and the emergence of trade organizations after the Second World War, such as the United Nations and the World Health Organization. But these adjustments in commerce have brought about only small shifts in how we trust each other. Today, we're not discussing human rights, political freedom, personal freedom, but instead, we're discussing how we trust each other in commerce, which impacts our economic freedom. Economic freedom defined as the way how we go about creating value to live the lives we want to live and support our families. This is not to be mistaken with universal basic income, but instead, it is the ability to earn a living while clearly seeing and understanding the truth about where the value you create goes, and clearly seeing and understanding the truth about where the value you pay for is derived. I just want to repeat that. Clearly seeing and understanding the truth about where the value you create goes, and clearly seeing and understanding the truth about where the value you pay for is divided. We could indeed ask, why is it that in 400 years, since the invention of the limited liability corporation, has the adjustments in commerce not significantly changed how we trust each other, and hence affecting our economic freedom? The answer may strike you as surprisingly simple. Most of our corporations today, even the trendy ones, still operate under bylaws that resemble the first limited liability corporation, which is the East India Trading Company. Whether it's the East India Trading Company, Enron, Apple, or Uber, the trust mechanisms of our economic models are still essentially the same. Workers still enrich equity owners who control the means of value creation, enabling equity owners to operate deceitfully in low levels of fairness, low levels of transparency, and high levels of inequity under a protective veil called the limited liability. The question is, why am I having this conversation with you guys and not the United Nations or the US federal government? Well, we know why not the US federal government since January. That was a joke, guys. Well, it's because the problem of trust in commerce starts with data and technology, and it can end with data and technology. I believe it is important that we, the collective technology community, understand the power that's in our hands. We have in our hands the power to change commerce, and as a result, change how we trust each other in commerce, and hence changing human economic freedom. I would say as a community, all of us, if we had to score ourselves, we would score as a C- when it comes to using technology to change trust in commerce to impact human freedom, a C-. We have not leveraged some of the key advances in technology to their full people-centric potential. For example, while the internet has profoundly changed global society, serious challenges still remain. Many identities are fake. Many reputations misrepresent. We don't necessarily understand how inventory really affects pricing. Provenance in supply chains are a black hole. And safety is a matter of compliance with the best set of lies needed to meet required compliance levels. I have a question. When we build companies, are we building them with the added capacity to remove untrustworthy behaviors? Are we building companies that encourage human beings to be just a little bit more fair, just a little bit more transparent, and just a little bit more equitable? In my journey so far, which you guys have shared the last 7 years with me, the answer for me has always been kind of either no or maybe. And I believe that most of us here today in this room, if asked, would have to own that answer the same way I do. Our path will be remembered as the C- technology leadership community. The community that inherited an underlying economic system devised for us 400 years ago in the past, with loopholes that can be exploited to enable us to lie and deceive each other in commerce, and we never bothered to change it. You can operate an organization today in this outdated model with reckless disregard and be barely liable. Now looking back at the limited liability corporation, we realize that they came with an open permission slip to misrepresent each other, to misrepresent ourselves to each other when we can for profit. And because we're somewhat selfish by genetic design, we conduct commerce with little disregard for the impact of the long-term sustainable triumph of the human species. Because of limited liability, our commercial actions are taken with low regard for fairness, transparency, equity, and our misrepresenting of data has left us with a fundamental lack of trust in our commercial landscape. We live in and we continue to build, including myself, commerce absent industrial strength and scalable trust mechanisms, enabling anyone to take advantage of conditions where data is easy to infest with misrepresentation, enabling anyone to take advantage. This is kind of hard to read and speak. Enabling anyone to take advantage of the ease to not comply with a contract without being noticed, and enabling anyone to take advantage of simply burying the truth. It's almost like we don't realize it, that we have worked ourselves into a state of commerce where we are left with no choice but to start every transaction or every contract with the automatic subliminal assumption that the counterparty cannot be trusted. I'll repeat that. We are left with no choice but to start every contract or every transaction with the automatic subliminal assumption that the counterparty cannot be trusted. This is why we don't read the terms and conditions when we sign up for websites and apps. Elon Musk is solving for autonomous cars and space travel, and Jeff Bezos and Jack Ma are turning every product into a service, and Ginny Rometty is trying to channel Dr. Watson, while Mark Zuckerberg continues to grow a dangerous spike in human vanity. But who is solving for trust? In this room today are enough leaders with enough influence and the tools in our hands to change the shape and complexion of commerce to be as much people-centric by having high trust as it can be profit-centric with little disregard for trust. This brings us to the subject of today's discussion. One of the tools we have in our hands here today represents a promise. It's the promise of the blockchain protocol. I started my work in blockchain from a very simple hypothesis. This simple hypothesis is that the last chapter of commerce, called trusted commerce, covering the economic human freedom of our species, is yet to be written. Resulting from the work leading up to the book and after, I concluded that we are indeed a generation that can change trust in commerce. There's always a but. But before the change can occur, we need to overcome a problem. This problem is that we are prisoners who are unaware of our own captivity, including myself. Most of us cannot easily see the bars of untrusted commerce that confine us as we go about building our companies and our new products and solutions. We don't realize that we're servants of an outdated system built with a flaw that allows us to graciously misrepresent and deceive each other as we exchange information with each other in this thing called data. We have accepted our dependence on intermediaries. We've accepted our dependence on the cat and mouse game of regulations and compliance, and we've accepted the burden of expensive audits and verifications. We simply can't see it clearly. Sometimes, in order to see things clearly, it's terrible. We need to step back from them. We need to see things from a distance to see them objectively. To see our condition behind bars objectively, let's all today take a step back from our lives as we know it. Let's go to my favorite place in the world. Let's go to the future. Let's go forward 100 years from today. From this vantage point in 2117, we can then look back 100 years here to 2017 and hopefully see our bars of confinement that I'm talking to you about here today for the first time. In order to facilitate this time travel experiment, I'm going to introduce you to one of my favorite people that will walk this planet. To meet this person, we need to board a time machine. Let's go into this time machine together into 2117. We're going to meet my great-granddaughter named Neelam Etwaru. Neelam is a teenager in 2117. And after doing something impactful for the human species, which I hope she does, she's being interviewed and she's being asked the following question. Neelam, where and from whom did you get your inspiration? Here is Neelam in the year 2117, and here are her remarks when asked where and from she gets her inspirations. Neelam has a better view than we have of ourselves today because she has the luxury of hindsight. Let's see how history will remember us.
I'm inspired by my great-grandfather's generation. My great-grandfather was a man named Richie Etwaru. He lived 100 years ago in the year 2017. He was an employed servant, but he didn't really know it at the time. He lived in a very difficult time in the world. We look back at that year 2017 from our modern world and think, wow, how horrible. But at the time, most of his generation, they thought they were pretty okay. Our great-grandparents didn't realize that they were employed servants. They got up every morning, crack of dawn, and left for work, many leaving their children behind. They worked in a form of servitude called wage employment. Wage employment was where they would work for companies they didn't really own significant shares of. They rarely shared in profits, and they were being told what to do by their masters. Being an employed servant was bad, but definitely not the worst that they endured. As a society, they lied to each other systematically. They took their earnings as these employees and spent it on things that they didn't need. And this was because they had this strange thing called marketing. Now, marketing was when you were permitted to openly lie to each other about products and services, just to drum up the desire in each other to buy things they didn't need. Coupled together, these two abuses were bad. But what really inspires me about that generation is how they changed commerce and thereby freed themselves from their servitude. It was a vicious, never-ending, spiraling cycle that had to be fixed. They had investors, markets, operators, and they all shared data with each other. But the data that they shared with each other was really weird. Okay, get this. The data that they shared with each other didn't just come with a simple and easy algorithm to test whether or not it was authentic. So they had to go to these people called intermediaries. Now, intermediaries checked and verified the data to make sure it didn't contain any lies. These verifiers had to systematically check every aspect of commerce just to make sure that there were no lies or deception. I know, strange, right? They shared data with each other, and this always required another person to verify the data. And they did this in their product safety data, their accounting records, their inventory data, their shareholder annual statements, data around their reputations, everything. All data was completely full of lies, even their identities sometimes. And get this, I love this one. They had this thing called LinkedIn.com. LinkedIn.com was this place where you can go and lie about who you were and nobody needed to verify it. I think at one point my great-grandfather described this LinkedIn.com thing as the place on the internet with the most lies. People were not as free in 2017 as we know our species can be free here in 2117. People were employed servants, and part of this was done to them, but the other part they did to themselves. Luckily, they were the last generation of human servants. I do recognize this is dorky, but this is from where and whom I get my inspiration.
So, my line here is, isn't my future great-granddaughter adorable? It's nice to know that just as we are inspired by people who have brought about change in our centuries past, my great-granddaughter Neelam will be inspired by the changes we've made, which can start at this conference right here today. You could call it a revolution. Let's talk about revolutions very quickly for a moment and why I believe that a trust revolution is happening. Whenever in history we've seen three conditions aligned simultaneously, there's usually been a revolution. Let's discuss why I believe so strongly that we have those three conditions in place today. Here are the three conditions. One, revolutions are anchored in a legitimate argument that there is a better way. Now, today we exchange data, and data is the cardiology of commerce. But the way we exchange data, as we discussed prior, leaves gaping holes in commerce. The loophole allows us to pack data with lies and misrepresent it, leading to low fairness, low transparency, and high inequity. Let me share a really simple example of what I mean by it is very easy for us to exploit data today by adding lies and misrepresentation to it. Imagine for a second that you guys are hiring me to drive around your loving family in this car. You're all super wealthy and you own a Rolls Royce. You know how you know you're super wealthy? When the back seat of your car is more comfortable than the front seat of the car. Okay? So you hire me to drive you around in your beloved family, and of course you want to check my driver record. And I come to you and I say, hey, don't check my driver record. I am notorious with data. I've got an Excel file here with every single thing about my driver record that you can ever imagine. I have dates, I have selfies with the cops, I have everything. Don't go to the DMV. Just take my Excel file. Here's my driver record. Would you do it? The answer is no. You wouldn't accept it. You would go to the DMV anyway. And I'll tell you why. It's because you don't trust the Excel file, and you don't trust me because data today can be easily tampered with. Most of us can remove, edit, and add records to freestanding digital data. The problem with this tampering is that it is not easy and quick for others to test whether the data set was tampered with or not. Yes, you can get very fancy, but it'll be difficult and expensive. And hence, we, the human species, tamper with data many times absent good intention because we can hide behind the veil of limited liability. If my driver record looked like this, I'll give you guys to digest it. It's not my real driver record, but it's close. If my driver record looked like this, I could easily highlight these three here and say, you know what? Let's just erase that. Remove them, pass it on to you, and you don't have an easy and simple way to identify that it was tampered with. We do this every single day as we pass data with each other. We live in a world where data comes to us with a wink and says, wink, wink, don't worry, I'm data, you can trust me, trust me. Okay? And what that has done is left us in a place where we rely on intermediaries, we rely on contracts, and we rely on familiarity. The reason why this talk is about blockchain is blockchain represents a fundamental shift in how we share data with each other. Blockchain records have a few things that are important about them, and the blockchain invention has one very core thing about how we trust data in addition to others. When a blockchain record is written, one of the first things that happen is it has to be written by someone that is permitted. So you see the first record here being written by the DMV. Now that's cool and interesting, but it's not super interesting, right? This is a use case. This is not a killer app as yet. The second thing about blockchain records, and we can talk in the panel about the genesis, algorithms, etc., is there is a SHA-256 key that is added to the record. Now think about this as a really, really fancy unhackable record. So far, this still kind of looks like the weird data that we transfer today with each other that says, trust me, you can trust me. Here's what happens. When a second record has to be added to a blockchain, that same algorithm that calculated the key for the first record takes the entire first record, including the key, and the entire second record as its input, and then creates a key for the second record, essentially chaining the records together, which gives you a sense of where chain comes in the word blockchain. When the third record is written, what do you think happens? Everything from the first record, including the key, everything from the second record, including the key, which was derived from the first record, and everything from the third record goes into that same algorithm, and out comes a key for the third record. Systematically using asymmetric cryptography to chain the records in a database one after the other. And this could go on and on and on and on. Essentially, using technology to chain records in a data set together so that if someone who didn't like that DUI that allegedly happened in 2003 tries to remove it, anyone very easily can use the same algorithm to chain the records to test to see if something was removed and very quickly and easily tell that the data was tampered with. This is a better way. It's one of the first conditions of revolutions. Data comes to us today and says, trust me, you can trust me. And data will come to us tomorrow with an easily testable method to know whether it's trustable or not. Now, I said there are three things that has to happen for revolutions to happen. Two is revolutions need enough power to be held in those that demand change. And most of the times, this is in the power of the young. The coming blockchain revolution is being driven by young people. I know, I'm teaching them. And they want trust and transparency in commerce. For the first time in our history, the young of our species have both the future spending power in their hands as well as the ability to build the structure of commerce all over again from the ground up, right at their fingertips, literally. Think about this for a second. Vitaly Buterin co-founded Ethereum when he was 20 years old. Ethereum is the #1 competitor of IBM's blockchain. The power is in the hands of the youth. The third thing that I see happening is that revolutionaries must believe that change can happen in a very short period of time. If they don't believe it, revolutions don't happen. And we've seen enough coverage on blockchain and enough use cases and discussion about it, both from government, from the young, from the old, in the US and outside of the US, to really understand that this change will happen quickly. And this is why I believe the end state will be that we will have a revolution in commerce, and it will be called the trust revolution. You're probably wondering, How did my great-granddaughter's generation got there in under 100 years? Well, they got there by democratizing three things. First, we helped them democratize trust. It stemmed from the basic inventions of blockchain. We'll talk about some of the smart contracts and some of that stuff after on the panel. We helped the world move from data that is difficult and cumbersome to trust to data that we can trust easily. They also got there because we set in motion for them the ability to democratize consensus. Consensus was democratized by layering on top of blockchains something called smart contracts, coupled with some early forms of software artificial intelligence. In addition to regulations such as fairness, transparency, and attribution, think about that. In addition to regulations such as fairness, transparency, and attribution, the new rules of commerce were coded into software-driven contractual agreements, and they're monitored for consensus, creating new business networks and busting up existing industries and restructuring them. And finally, they democratized autonomous commerce. They did this by taking trusted data and software-driven rules and layering them on top of a dematerialized view of the world powered by the Internet of Things. Let's talk very, very briefly about IoT and AI. IoT and AI are both powerful handmaidens of the blockchain revolution. They support and strengthen what blockchain can do. Without blockchain, neither of them cannot redefine the relationship between equity owners and the broader wage employment community. Without blockchain, IoT and AI are just faster tools to build more untrusted commerce. But when combined with blockchain as the active agent, the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence becomes a part of the trust revolution. How do we get there? Well, I've got a couple of maturity models for you. It's an analyst conference. A real analyst conference. I started using the phrase fake analyst lately. It's going over well. So we have to get past our love affair or current crush on financial data on blockchain. We're distracted by Bitcoin and all the tulip ICOs. I will say to you right now, Bitcoin is to blockchain what AOL chat was to the internet. Just the first instantiation of it. We have to get to identity data, reputation data, inventory data, market data, agreement data, and corporate data. And I am seeing use cases and killer apps with these every day, both in academia and in commerce. The second thing we have to realize is that blockchains happen in networks. And these networks has rules written around how data can actually enter a record. The rules are interdependent by participants on a network, and they're called smart contracts. And they're independent between some parties and then others. And what happens is that you can start to trust counterparties and transact with them because you know that when they wrote data, the data had to go through the rules of the smart contract to be written. It just can't be entered there. And as a result, when you have people that want to go rogue, you can quickly identify them and use consensus algorithms to replace what they have. This allows us to transact with greater intimacy with things intra-organization, intra-industry, and intra-geography. Now, if you take those two things and you plot them on a chart, on the x-axis, looking at the data sets that we will put through commerce, and the y-axis, looking at the new business partners and counterparties that we can now transact with at lower cost and high trust, you'll recognize that what we're really talking about here is about new market structures. And this is why the subtitle of my book is that every company is at risk of being disrupted by a trusted version of itself. When you add IoT and AI to this, you get something really simple. This chart becomes smaller, and you get even newer information systems and even newer business networks because of the amount of new data sets that we will transact with. I'm very thankful for your attention today. I am anxious to see how each of us can take action in this powerful technological paradigm we have in our hands today at this conference. We can control whether we're the last generation of human servants living in low transparency and low trust, or the first generation of people who are truly free from systematically deceiving each other for profit. I sincerely believe that the technology leadership community that is in here in this room can change the structure and design of commerce to be more trusted, and hence in the end will be looked back from history to seen as the generation that changed human economic freedom. Thank you very much.